Go ahead.
Oh, great. Well, I first want to welcome everybody here. It was, for many of you, a wonderful opportunity to have lunch and learn yesterday and learn about the Peace Corps in Mogadishu from Gabriel Sandler. And now, again, we are going from the Peace Corps and water systems in Mogadishu to coronavirus and Torah for our time. So Rabbi Mason Barkin, my dear colleague, about less than a year ago, thought we should, as needed, offer these classes that we're calling Torah for our times. That was actually Rabbi Mason, the brainchild of Rabbi Mason Barkin. And so as the summer of awful racial tensions and protests was upon us in June, by August, Rabbi Mason Barkin had organized our first session to talk about Black Lives Matter and Jewish responses. And then on Yom Kippur, during our afternoon Torah for our time study session, we talked about political discourse and how we talk to each other. And tonight is our third Torah for our times of the last 6 or so months. And we're just so excited because every time it seems like we're having more and more interest and, of course, more and more participation. And what we're doing is taking timely Jewish issues, timely contemporary American universal issues and putting a Jewish spin on it, looking through the prism of Jewish tradition and Jewish values. And as Rabbi Mason Barkin put in the publicity for tonight, having honest conversations and respectful conversations with each other about ideas related to all sorts of things. Well, tonight we are talking about, of course, COVID-19 from a medical perspective and a Jewish perspective, and also talking about things like vaccinations and what life has been like and is continuing to be like and why it is that way during this pandemic. So we're going to start just with an overview to start with it within a Jewish context. And in order to do that, we go to, I hope everyone can see, we go to Rambam. Can everyone see the screen, Rabbi?
Yes.
Great. So everyone, mostly everyone knows that there was a man named Rambam, Rabbi Moses ben Maimon, who was also called Maimonides. The joke was that when we talk about the Mishnah Torah, his rewriting of the Mishnah and the Talmud, we call him Rambam. He's the rabbi. But when we look at Maimonides, the philosopher, we call him Maimonides. He lived about 800 years ago, born in Spain, died in Egypt, and he was what we believe, although he really wasn't a medical doctor, he was, in addition to being a philosopher and a great rabbi, the line is from Moses to Moses, there was no one like Moses, which is why he got to write his own Talmud. We think that he was also a doctor, so he was a Jewish rabbi, a Jewish doctor, a Jewish philosopher. His mother was very proud of him. And he really sustained what I call a 2,000-plus-year-old love affair between the rabbis in Judaism and medicine. We did not fall into the medical professions as a community by accident. It's really part and parcel of the DNA structure of the Jewish soul. And so here's what he said, and I think this will be a great way to set up our speakers, and then we'll introduce them and our topic for tonight. He said, Maimonides, that is, said, "He who regulates his life in accordance with the laws of medicine, with the sole motive of maintaining a sound and vigorous physique and begetting children to do his work and labor for his benefit, is not following the right course." In other words, if I go to the gym, if I eat 3 squares a day, if I wash myself regularly and clean up my house so that, stuff doesn't develop in my house, and I do it really only so that I look buff and look, really chiseled, and also so that I have big, strong kids who are going to take care of my land and take care of my stuff, that's not the right intention. That's not a good reason or the reason why we maintain our physical health. He goes on to say, a man should aim to maintain physical health and vigor in order that his soul may be upright in the condition known to God. In other words, we take care of our bodies, we take care of ourselves, our hygiene, our health, our physique. Why? Because we want our soul to be upright. We want to be good people, we want to be astute, and we want to be aware of our obligation to mitzvot, to God, to live a life that God commands us to live. Whoever throughout his life allows this course will be continually serving God, even while engaged in business and even during cohabitation, because his purpose in all that he does will be to satisfy his needs so as to have a sound body with which to serve God. In other words, this is a twofer. If your intention in working out and taking care of yourself is to look good and have babies and be strong, that's not good. But if your intention is for your soul to be elevated, for you to be healthy so that you can connect to God and do mitzvot and pray and study and be connected to the physical and spiritual world, you get both. You get a physical outcome that's positive and you get a spiritual outcome that's positive. Finally, he says, even when he sleeps and seeks repose, because to Maimonides, writing the Mishnah Torah, writing the Guide for the Perplexed, being a rabbi, being a doctor, being Maimonides, he probably never slept. So he has to say this probably, even when he sleeps and seeks repose to calm his mind and rest his body, so as not to fall sick and be incapacitated from serving God, his sleep is a service to the Almighty. I love that last line. I'm sure my colleagues do as well, because what he's saying is, I may not ever sleep, but don't occupy yourself with Torah, mitzvot, prayer, meditation 24/7. Make sure you sleep. That is also of service to God. And so I wanted to use that as a way of opening up our conversation tonight about all of these topics that we're going to hit upon. And mainly to talk about this very deep connection in Jewish life between our physical being and our physical well-being and our spiritual well-being, our health, our physical health, and our mental spiritual health, and how inseparably linked they are in Jewish tradition. And as long as we intend to take care of the soul, we wake up every morning saying, Elohai neshama shenatata bi tahurahi, oh God, the soul that you have given me is pure. We should act that way throughout the day, throughout our weeks, and taking care and nourishing and nurturing ourselves. So that is the setting, the background, if you will, for our conversation tonight as it pertains to COVID-19, this pandemic, and of course, the vaccination. What we will not be doing tonight, dear friends, is we will not be having a conversation or opening up the complaint department specifically with Dr. Sunenshine about whether we like or don't like the rollout of the vaccine program. That is not Dr. Sunenshine's responsibility. That is not, she's not only in charge, well, I'm gonna introduce you now anyway, Dr. Sunenshine. Dr. Rebecca Sunenshine, who will be our first speaker, is the medical director for disease control at Maricopa County Department of Public Health. She is also an epidemiologist. She is also brilliant. She is also a member of Congregation Beth Israel, which makes us very, very proud. She is also the daughter of Dory and Harry Sunenshine, which makes them very, very proud. But she is ultimately the person charged with the care for, not just as it relates to COVID-19, but for all disease of the 6th largest county, 5th largest county, something like that, in the country. 5th, 4th, even better, 4th. I'm even more impressed. But I also want to give her thanks before she talks, because she has given hours and hours and hours of her time, because she's not busy enough as it is, preparing her daughter for a bat mitzvah, getting us ready for high holidays when we were able to welcome up to 60 people for live services, and hours going through all of our Camp Stein protocols and procedures, giving us advice and really enabling us to be as successful as God. Thank God we've been able to be in running our preschool program and our Camp 56 program and high holidays. And so it's my pleasure to introduce Rebecca first. Going back to what I was saying, she's not going to be here to talk about, again, political / rollout related issues. So she will speak for herself, obviously. And now I want to turn it over real quick to Rabbi Mason Barkin so she can introduce Rabbi Jason Weiner, and then we'll let them talk, and I will stop speaking now.
It's hard when you've got 3 rabbis on a Zoom. We've just all got to get our words in. So I want to share just briefly a bit about our goals tonight and what it is we are hoping to do. And that is to approach this next phase of the crazy journey we have been on since March, now that the vaccine has started to roll out. How do we approach this from a Reform Jewish perspective? Keeping in mind that one of the most basic, most important parts of being a Reform Jew is making informed choices, making educated choices. So what we are hoping to do tonight is to give you the information you need to feel like you are, and to make sure that you are empowered with all of the information, both as a person who is going to inject stuff into your arm and as a Jew. Right? Holding both of those things, making sure that you have all of the information you need to step into this next phase, feeling like you truly have all of your information, both from a medical and a spiritual perspective. So we are so grateful to our speakers tonight who are going to bring us their expertise and help us to step into this next part of the journey together. And real quick, I just want to touch back on Zoom etiquette, which I know we are all really good at now. But to just to reinforce, we're going to stay on mute while our speakers are speaking. And if you have a comment or a question, we highly encourage you to put it into the chat. We had a few questions come in ahead of time, but not very many. So feel free to add your questions into the chat, and then Rabbi Khan and I will take a look at the questions that come in and moderate our question and answer part of the discussion when we get to the end of our time together tonight. So please use the chat. Please don't unmute, not because we don't want to hear your voices, but because we want to give the time to our speakers. And on that note, I will almost stop talking, but not before I introduce Rabbi Jason Weiner, who is joining us tonight from Los Angeles, where he is both the senior rabbi and director of spiritual care at Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles. So that means I'm sure you've heard of Cedars-Sinai. That's where all the celebrities go in Los Angeles. So it's a huge hospital, and he is in charge of not only providing direct spiritual chaplaincy and care to the people who come to the hospital, but also training the entire and overseeing the entire chaplaincy team. So we are so grateful to you that you are bringing your expertise to us. There's a whole long list of accomplishments that Rabbi Weiner has to share. And I just want to highlight that he is the author of both a Jewish Guide to Practical Medical Decision Making and a Guide to Observance of Jewish Law in a Hospital. So please, Rabbi Weiner, I hope many of us will check out your writing and learn more from you after this gracious introduction. We are so glad that you are here with us. Thank you. And now let's turn it over to Rebecca. Rabbi Khan and I, we're going to be quiet and let our experts do the talking. All right, Dr. Sunenshine, please jump in when you're ready.
All right, I'm sharing my screen. Can everybody see the screen? That's a yes. Okay, good.
Yes.
All right, here we go. So I'm really going to be focusing on COVID-19 vaccine. I think that's what everybody is sort of talking about. And I just need these slides to actually move forward. There we go. So what we're going to talk about the vaccine is, I do know, we all know that it's called Operation Warp Speed. And I really want to touch on what is warp speed other than a term from Star Trek, and how do we know that the vaccine is safe? I'm going to cover how the COVID-19 vaccine works, at least the 2 vaccines that have already been introduced to us. Who can get the vaccine? What are the side effects? And what does the word side effects really mean in this case? What is our plan to get a vaccine in the population, which I'm not going to touch on as much in this particular one. And then we'll go through a Q&A at the end, actually. So first I want to talk about what is warp speed. And I think this really really gave the public the wrong impression. And it's true that this vaccine or these vaccines were developed much more quickly than any other vaccine has ever been developed, to my knowledge, although they sure did put a lot of effort into the Ebola vaccine as well. And a lot of people assume that because it was faster that they skipped steps, and that is completely false. No steps were skipped when they were developing this vaccine. So traditionally what happens is this R&D stands for research and development. That includes 3 phases, phase 1, 2, and 3 clinical trials. And then when that research and development is complete, the FDA takes a very careful look at the data. They say it's okay, they approve it, and then they begin to manufacture it, which can take many, many months. And then CDC will make recommendations, and the immunization group that make sort of group of experts federally will make recommendations. Well, what happened in this case was everyone recognized so early on what an important role vaccination was going to play in this pandemic that a lot of different countries, with the United States being one of them, poured a whole lot of resources into making sure we got this vaccine much faster. So the research and development started literally the day they found out that there was this unique strain in China. And you may say, well, how did they know? And the answer is, anytime a unique strain of something is discovered, including a unique strain of influenza, they start working on a vaccine. A lot of people don't realize that. So there's a whole lot of starts and stops to vaccine manufacture that people don't even realize, because we're always worried that a pandemic is coming. So they started, and what happened was all these resources were poured into the process. So they were able to they started with phase 1 because that's what they have to do for those clinical trials. And then once they kind of got far enough into phase 1 that they realized that that vaccine was looking good, they started phase 2, and then they started phase 3, and they all overlapped. And then as soon as it was looking like things were going to move forward, the FDA started looking at those data as we moved forward instead of waiting until all the research was complete. And sure enough, as soon as things were looking good, they started manufacturing. And then CDC and ACIP started looking at all this information. So the minute there was enough data to feel that things were safe, it was already manufactured and ready to roll out in the population, and absolutely no steps were skipped. And I think that's really important for people to understand when you're thinking about vaccine safety. Okay, so how is the COVID vaccine approved and prioritized? The Food and Drug Administration evaluates the safety and efficacy based on the data of a phase 3 clinical trial, which is when they compare people who get the vaccine to people who get a placebo or a saline shot. And they look at the data independently from the pharmaceutical company that made it. And that's really important, right? You wouldn't want people from the pharmaceutical company making the decision about whether it's safe. So they do an independent review with experts. They make recommendations to the FDA, who then just determines if it merits an emergency use authorization. Then there's a separate Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, or the ACIP, which is a separate independent committee that includes hundreds of experts, both from CDC and all different medical and scientific fields. They review the same data and the emergency use authorization, and then they make a recommendation for prioritization and administration. Then CDC makes the recommendation based on that. And then there's another committee in Arizona, the Vaccine and Antiviral Prioritization Advisory Committee, who separately reviews the EUA and the data and the recommendations from the ACIP. They make recommendations, and then it goes down to us in Maricopa County, where we actually got together with a group of local scientists, researchers, and experts, took a look at that same primary data and made our own decisions about safety and efficacy. And then they made a recommendation to Maricopa County Public Health after that local independent review. And that's when we decided to use it. So I bolded all the times that a separate group of experts and researchers and scientists looked at this data to make sure that they they were seeing the same things that the federal government and everyone else was, and they all ended up recommending the vaccine. So again, you're not looking at just the government saying, hey, it's safe. There's lots of different parties involved. So there's 2 different vaccines that are out there that have been approved so far by the FDA for an emergency use authorization. They are both mRNA or messenger RNA vaccines. And what that means is that they do not contain the whole virus or the whole viral genetic code. So it's just a piece of the genes of the virus. And that's important because just a piece cannot cause an infection. No matter how hard it tries, it doesn't have the machinery to cause an infection. So there is no way for this vaccine to give you COVID. Just can't happen. It contains a segment of the viral genetic code. And what it does is it makes the person who gets the vaccine, the recipient's body, generate an immune response as if it actually encountered the live virus. So it kind of fakes the body into thinking that it saw the virus because it saw one particular piece of the virus. And then the body's natural immune system responds by creating not just antibodies, but also creates sort of a memory response with your immune system so that when it does see, or if it sees that virus again, it is ready to respond and it will respond robustly. And that all occurs without any risk of infection to the recipient. So this is just a diagram to help me walk through a couple more pieces of information about these messenger RNA vaccines. And a lot of people think, oh my God, this is a new thing. We have no idea what could happen. No, I don't like it. It's a risk. But the truth is that researchers have been working on these mRNA vaccines for years and years and years. And they just weren't quite at the point where they were ready to deliver them into a vaccine because the resources weren't there. But they were.
Rebecca, can you zoom this one a tiny bit?
Can I zoom it?
Yeah, I don't know if it can be.
I
know people, if they have devices, can do that, but I can try to figure it out too. So just keep talking, and I'll figure it out. I got it.
Okay, it's not super important. I'll use my cursor.
Oh, see, I did it wrong. Hold on. Don't go anywhere. Oh, I broke it. Okay.
I wish I knew how to zoom it from here. My dad would know.
I'm fine. I'm not touching it again. A Jewish male touches the technology and ruins it. So I'm done.
Okay. So bottom line is it had been being worked on for a long, long time. But the concept is that the researchers take a little piece of the RNA from the virus and it goes into the vaccine. It gets injected into a muscle. And then your cells see a little piece of that viral RNA and they display it on the outside. And your immune system responds and makes these antibodies. But what's important about this being messenger RNA, and I don't want to get too scientific here, but there's a whole bunch of stuff that happens in a cell. Some of it happens in the nucleus, and some of it happens outside of the nucleus in the cytoplasm. And where you keep all of your genes, your human genes that give you blonde hair or dark hair or make you short or make you tall, that's all in the nucleus. But when this is injected into your body and gets into your cells, that messenger RNA makes these proteins in the cytoplasm. It never gets anywhere near your own genes. So there was this myth that the virus could somehow integrate into your own genetic code and that it could stay there. And that cannot happen because this messenger RNA can never get into the nucleus where your genes are kept almost like in their own little cell. Secondly, mRNA is something that doesn't stay in your cells for very long. It doesn't live for very long. So people are worried that this mRNA or messenger RNA will stay and float around in your cells in your bloodstream for a long time, but it doesn't. It degrades very quickly. So just in a few short days, maybe a week, that mRNA is gone. Once your body sees that little piece of the virus, it creates a protein that matches to COVID-19. It's to a spike protein. And then you have those two types of immunity, the memory T cell immunity and the antibodies. All right, so that's as much as I'll get into that. So the first type that you've all heard about is the Pfizer Bioentech vaccine. It received its FDA EUA on December 11th. It has been shown to be highly effective with 2 doses, and highly effective is 95% effective. And I look at 95% as an infectious diseases clinician and a medical epidemiologist, and I am jumping up and down. That is fantastic for a vaccine. The flu vaccine, great vaccine, not nearly as effective. It's about 60% effective. So this is an incredible vaccine. We did not expect that anyone would be able to make one that was 95% effective after 2 doses. So in this case, you get your doses a minimum of 21 days apart. There's a little bit of wiggle room there. And the truth is, even if you got it 3 months later, it'd be just fine. It's available to individuals who are 16 years and older. And you might say, well, why 16 and not 17? And the answer is because that's who they included in the clinical trial. They are doing more studies to see if it's effective in children under 16, because eventually we would like to be able to get children vaccinated. That just hasn't been done yet. Likewise, there were no pregnant women in the clinical trials. And we do that because nobody likes doing anything new on pregnant women. So that will take time. What's challenging about this particular vaccine is that it requires ultra cold storage and comes in 1,000 doses at a time. And that's why, and this is the only time I'm going to talk at all about vaccine rollout, that's why Maricopa County had used these giant healthcare system pods, because we have to be able to get 1,000 doses out very, very quickly, and we need special freezers to store it, and we need big systems in order to manage the vaccine. So the second vaccine that came out is called Moderna, and it received its EUA on December 18th. Also highly effective. It says greater than 90%, but ultimately it's about 94 to 95% effective as well. No difference between the effectiveness of Moderna and Pfizer. If somebody offers you one or the other, please take either one. They're both highly effective and very good vaccines. Also requires 2 doses, about 28 days apart. And this one's available to individuals 18 years and older, only because that's who they included in the study. And it can be stored in a standard freezer and allocated in 100 doses at a time. And that's why this vaccine is a lot easier to distribute out into the population, particularly in schools and small healthcare providers. So I want to talk a little bit about the side effects. You've heard so much about this, and I put the word side effects in quotes because I don't even see them as side effects. To me, they're main effects. They are expected, we want them to happen, and they're evidence that the vaccine is working. So when your body's immune system gets exposed to this little piece of viral RNA, your immune system responds by producing these antibodies and this T cell memory response. And when it is exposed to a real infection or a vaccine, it's working very hard, and it sets off a chain of events that can lead to fever, fatigue, achiness, headache, all of those things. And what that tells us is that your immune system is responding. It's how you feel when you're kind of starting to get a cold, and it's also how you feel when you're responding to a vaccine. We also know that the area where you inject it into your arm can get red and inflamed and sore. Again, we expect it. It occurs about 80% of the time, that local effect. So you want it to happen because you want to know that your body is reacting. And when we talk about systemic inflammation, that's the fever, the muscle aches, and the headaches. So a couple rules about these side effects. The stronger the immune response, the stronger the side effects. So you can imagine that the younger and the healthier you are, the stronger your immune response is going to be, and the more likely you are to experience those side effects. We also know that you're going to have more of these side effects after the second dose than the first dose, because your body's immune system has already developed some of that ability to fight the infection. Not enough to call you immune, but some of it. And the side effects typically last only 1 to 2 days, and they can be treated with over-the-counter pain medicine like Tylenol or ibuprofen, Advil, or any of those that just can make you feel better, and that's not an issue at all. So the main point of this slide is not to tell you exactly what the percentage of each type of side effect is. It's to tell you that when you look at Moderna and Pfizer, they all have the same side effects. Fatigue is the most common, then headache, then joint or muscle pain. Fever occurs in about 1 in 5 persons, and they are pretty much the same for both. So don't pick a vaccine based on effectiveness or side effects. They're just about the same. And I also want to say that the fever that you get really doesn't last more than 2 days if you are one of those 1 in 5. Lastly, the data that I'm showing you are from individuals who are roughly between 18 and 64 years old. So the percentages that you're seeing are from the youngest group that they tested. So if you're older than 64, you're likely to have fewer side effects because your immune system won't respond as strongly. All right, well, who should be vaccinated? If you're sick with COVID-19 or you have any other evidence of a viral illness or any illness, please wait until you're better. The last thing we want is for you to be sick, go get vaccinated, and then expose a whole bunch of other people getting vaccinated. If you know that you are exposed to someone with COVID-19, please wait until your quarantine period is over. Lots of questions about pregnant and breastfeeding individuals. And I mentioned before, there were no pregnant and breastfeeding individuals in that clinical trial. So what do they do? How do we know it's safe? What happened was they got together a large group of experts, of obstetricians and gynecologists, of immunologists, researchers and scientists, and they got them all together and they said, okay, given that we're in the middle of a pandemic, and we know that pregnant women and breastfeeding, particularly pregnant women, are at higher risk for having severe disease from COVID, and their child is at risk for being born prematurely. We know that getting COVID is a risk to the pregnant woman. And when we look at how the mRNA vaccine affects the body, we know that it doesn't cross the placenta into the fetus. The theory is that there is no theoretical risk to the fetus from the vaccine or to the pregnant woman, but there is a risk from COVID. So their recommendation is that they can get vaccinated, but they know that it's an individual choice and it should be discussed with your healthcare provider. So what about if you were infected with COVID before? Should you get vaccinated? And the answer is, even if you've had COVID before, we have enough data to know that immunity will probably prevent you from getting reinfected for about 90 days or 3 months, but we don't think that you're going to be, or we don't know actually how long that immunity will last. So it is recommended that you still get vaccinated even if you got the disease before, and we think that having vaccine-related immunity is actually better than having immunity from natural infection. And I know someone's going to ask me, how long does the immunity last from the vaccine? And the answer is we don't know yet because we haven't had enough time to study it. So people with depressed immune systems, remember what an important role the immune system plays in vaccination. If yours doesn't work as well, you're at much higher risk for having severe COVID. So you should get vaccinated, but your body might not respond as strongly. So you do want to continue to be extra careful, as should everyone right now. And then lastly, if you did have COVID and you were treated with antibody therapy, the recommendation is to wait 90 days. And since we don't know how this vaccine reacts with other vaccines, if you got any other vaccine, wait 14 days before getting the COVID vaccine. Well, what about allergies? My goodness, when the UK rolled out their Pfizer vaccine before we did, there was all kinds of headlines about severe allergies. And what we learned from that is better to be safe than sorry. If you have a history of a severe allergic reaction, And by severe, I don't mean you were extra itchy or you had a bad rash. By severe, I mean anaphylaxis, so trouble breathing, swelling of the face, needed an epinephrine dose or had to go to the hospital. You still can be vaccinated. However, you do need to be observed for 30 minutes after. And that is unless you had a history of a severe reaction to another mRNA vaccine or any component of this particular vaccine. They added on something called polysorbate, which is related to a component of the vaccine. And so those individuals really should not get vaccinated and should work with an allergist or their primary care physician. But this is a very small number of people. Most people can get vaccinated, and if they have that history of severe allergy, should just be observed for longer than the normal 15 minutes.
Rebecca, we have about 2 more minutes. I'm also noticing that you're answering, it's kind of fun, you're answering questions as they're being asked, which is awesome. That means you're like totally in line. But if you could take a couple more minutes, and then at the end, when we do Q&A, you'll find that you'll be going back to a lot of this info too.
Okay, we're on the last
thanks.
one.
You're doing great though. I'm sure you've never talked about any of this yet, but
No.
you're doing great.
Okay, so just a reminder that you don't get immediate protection from any vaccine. It takes about 2 weeks after that dose to build immunity. So you need both doses in order to have that 95% immunity 2 weeks after the second dose. No vaccine is 100% effective. And given the currently limited information on how well the vaccine works, we strongly recommend that you continue to wear a mask, stay 6 feet away from others, avoid crowds, wash your hands, and do all those other things that we've been telling you to do all along until we get a handle on this disease, which I wish it would be soon, but it might take us another 6 months or maybe longer. And then lastly, I want to kind of lead into Rabbi Weiner's, what I think he might say is I want to give you the science behind why I think we should all get vaccinated. Vaccines provide 2 levels of immunity: individual immunity, which is that 95%. It's not 100%, and it protects the individual who's vaccinated most of the time. But then there's this concept called herd immunity or community immunity. And that's when enough people in a population are vaccinated or immune to a disease that the disease doesn't have anywhere to spread. So all those people who are immune, they're never even exposed to the disease. So they're actually 100% protected because they never even get exposed. So when I think about this is the whole concept of vaccines and population health, is when I get vaccinated to protect my family and my community so that we can all contribute to that herd immunity, not just to protect myself. And that is our website where you can find a whole bunch of information, and I will stop there.
Thank you, Dr. Sunenshine. Rabbi Weiner.
Sure. All right, you're welcome. Let me stop this.
Okay, thank you. That was really fascinating. Thank you. And it's great to be with all of you. I love Arizona. I wish I was there with you in person, but it's good to virtually be in Arizona tonight. And thank you to your rabbis who have been so warm and gracious. It's really, really wonderful to spend some time with you and share some ideas. And I look forward to discussing them. I'll just jump right in because you're right. Dr. Sunenshine really segued perfectly. The Jewish community and Jewish history and the rabbinic world has a long tradition with vaccines. As long as vaccines have been around, there's been a strong connection with the Jewish community. So the first vaccine was created by Dr. Edward Jenner, right? Dr. Jenner, that was the smallpox vaccine. And at that time, the rabbis were already discussing, should we be taking this vaccine? So you find actually in rabbinic texts from over 200 years ago, actually writing out in Hebrew, smallpox, and vaccine, and discussing it. And they actually referred to Dr. Jenner as being a pious person because he was so righteous for having created this vaccine. They loved him. And the rabbis who wrote about it wrote from the very beginning. They even wrote, the vaccines then were not like they are today. They did not have the same sophistication and safety. And some people would die from the vaccines back then. And even despite that, the rabbi said, you know what? If you're safer with the vaccine than you are with the disease, we should support the vaccine. And that was back in the days when the vaccines were much more dangerous than they are. And many of the rabbis, discussed it. Of course, rabbis don't always agree on everything, but the rabbi said, hey, the doctors don't always agree on everything either. So people were debating, and the rabbis concluded, and it's published in many, many of the works of the rabbinic literature about 200 years ago, that the Jewish tradition is to follow science and medicine. As Rabbi Kahn opened up with, we listen to doctors, we listen to science, and even if there's disagreements, we follow the majority of medical opinion, particularly the governmental health authorities. And so the rabbinic community was very, very supportive from the very beginning. Interestingly, they came up with a verse from the Torah, and this always could be like trivia, like which verse in the Torah commands vaccines? And you have to like really rack your brain because like, well, was there any kind of vaccines back in the days of the Torah? So interestingly, there is a verse that the rabbis have kind of concluded that this is the verse that actually references the importance of being vaccinated. And you'd never guess it. I would never have guessed it myself. They say that it's the verse in Deuteronomy that says you should put a guardrail on your roof. It's actually a commandment in the Torah to put a guardrail on your roof. This, in the ancient times, they actually, houses were like, like Pueblo style, right? Like flat roof houses. And people would sometimes go up on the roof for various reasons, right? And it's dangerous to be on the roof. You could fall off, God forbid. And so the Torah itself says you better put a guardrail up there, so just to protect yourself, preventative measures, right? Preventative medications. And by the way, the rabbi said, that's not just referring to yourself. What if you say, you know what, I don't go up there on my roof that often. And when I go up there, it's not like I'm playing football up there. I mean, it's pretty safe. I'm not going to fall off my roof. Come on. Well, what if someone else would be on your roof and they would fall off? It's your responsibility. That's your roof. So the rabbi said, it's your responsibility, the Torah is saying, to prevent danger to yourself and to others. And so the rabbi said that verse which says put a guardrail on your roof it's back in the Talmud. Maimonides codifies this, that verse is a principle, a value of protecting our health. And there's all kinds of questions people ask. I mean, I'm sure like Dr. Sunenshine and Rabbi Kahn and Rabbi Mason Barkin, I mean, we're getting calls, all kinds of calls and all kinds of concerns. People are asking me all the time, but Rabbi, what if there's pig product in the vaccine? So first of all, there's no pig product in the vaccine. But let's say there was, and a person keeps kosher and they don't want to eat pig. So importantly, even for someone who avoids eating pig, we are allowed to benefit from pig. We just don't eat it. So there's pig valves are used in medicine. You can use pig products. And even if it was eating, to save a life, you could eat the pig. So it wouldn't be a problem. But that's just a common misconception that people ask me about. So this is why rabbis across denominations, across communities, Sephardic, Orthodox, Reform, Conservative, have been supporting the vaccine, and that's why they've been getting vaccinated. And I think there's rabbis on this call who have been vaccinated, including myself. I've received both vaccines, both shots already. We see Rabbi Mason Barkin still has the proof fresh to get it. I don't have the Band-Aid anymore, but I have proudly my card from the federal government, from the CDC that I display proudly here on my desk. And the truth is, it was very emotional when I got my vaccine. It brought me to tears. I've been working in a hospital here. I'm on the COVID floors with COVID patients. I've seen how dangerous this illness is, how horrible this has been, and not just health-wise. I mean, that's first and foremost. Of course, this is a dangerous disease. No one wants to get sick from COVID-19. And then in addition to that, there's all the other concerns, whether it's the society being shut down and economic concerns, or kids needing to go to school. I mean, just all the things that this pandemic, the havoc it has wrought, that this vaccine, it's almost the light at the end of the tunnel. It's our way out of this pandemic. And so actually I said a blessing. I said a bracha. Some of my friends said the Shechianu blessing, that we say, thank you, God, for bringing us to this moment. I said a blessing for the first vaccine. I said a blessing that's called in Hebrew Hatov HaMeitiv, which is, God is good and does good. And that traditionally one would say the Shechianu blessing when they are experiencing joy, and Hatov HaMeitiv, they say that blessing when they're experiencing joy, but their joy also helps other people. And I felt that this was a joy for myself, but for our society. And then the second blessing, the second vaccine, there's another prayer that's also in the Talmud that basically says, the prayer is basically, dear God, may what I'm doing contribute to my health and the health of our society, because you are our healer. And that's a blessing some people even say when they take Tylenol or any kind of healthcare. And that's just a beautiful recognition of, the divine role, so to speak, in both healing and also giving the scientists, the medical professionals, the doctors, the wisdom and the courage to endure in this pandemic. Science has really come through in an incredible way and is saving us from this pandemic. And it's really, really humbling and very profound. And I believe it's part of our responsibility. Queen Esther, and we're coming to Purim now. If there's any, someone asked me the other day, okay, so is there really a Jewish responsibility? I mean, you have to protect your own health, but is there responsibility to society? Queen Esther risked her life to save the Jewish people. She put her life at risk. And this is really not putting our lives at risk to get the vaccine. This is a minor inconvenience. It's really healthcare. It's saving our lives. And but we see from the model of Queen Esther that there is a Jewish value of doing whatever we can, even if it would be a risk. That's why even at the time when people were asking about joining the trials, I personally wanted to join a trial. I didn't get into one in time, but I was encouraging people, we should take part in the medical trials even. So now this isn't even experimental anymore. Now this is approved by the FDA. And this is, I believe it's a mitzvah. Obviously, we're giving you information for you to make the decision yourself, but I really believe that it is a mitzvah to be vaccinated. And it's fascinating, the Talmud has another story. For example, the Talmud tells us, it's a famous story of people on a boat out in the ocean. And one person on the boat, I guess he's bored. He starts drilling a hole underneath his seat. And the other people on the boat say, excuse me, what do you think you're doing? So they say, what? It's under my seat. Don't worry, it's not under your chair. He says, yeah, we're in this boat together, my friend. You sink the ship, we're all going down. Don't drill that hole. And that's part of what we're all in it together. And this is part of our responsibility, our communal responsibility. It's interesting, and just to say a couple other thoughts about pandemic and vaccine distribution. There's so much interesting stuff. And I'll just share some thoughts and some ideas about what the rabbis are debating right now and what's really actually live in Israel right now in the debates and their vaccine distribution. Because as Dr. Sunenshine pointed out, the vaccine distribution, this is a scientific, a medical decision. There are also value decisions here. And it's interesting always just to ask ourselves, what does Judaism say? What are some Jewish values that are relevant to this case at hand? So when it comes to vaccine distribution, what the United States, what the FDA has engaged in is what we call, public health measures, public health approach to trying to, sometimes we call in hospitals, patient-centered care. This is community-centered care, right? How do we help the entire community? How do we help the most people? How do we provide the most benefit to our community? And it's interesting that this is actually the way that the rabbis in the Talmud approached public health, because you can't always help everyone at once. Sometimes you have to prioritize. So how do you prioritize? So interestingly, there is a case in the Talmud that is actually debated in modern philosophy and is actually being used with self-driving cars today. It's so relevant. The case in the Talmud goes as follows. Imagine someone could shoot an arrow, and they were such a good shot that they could shoot that arrow and it would kill 5 people with one shot. And you happen to be in between that person, the victims, the potential victims, and the archer, and you have a shield. But you only look, it's too late. You only have time, you don't have time to block the arrows, just enough to maybe divert them. And then you notice, if I divert them to the right, that's the only way you can do it. There's another person standing over there, and you're going to divert that arrow towards that person. So this is the famous, also the trolley problem. You ever heard of trolleyology, where you have the train coming down the tracks, and you're at the fork in the tracks, and you can pull a lever to divert the train, and you see the train's headed towards a family of 6 that decided to take a nap on the train track for whatever reason, and they don't hear the train coming, and you say, I better divert the train and pull the lever to go on the other track. And as you're about to do it, you realize, oh no, there's another person on that track as well. I guess it's nap on track day. And there's a person napping on that track, but it's just one person. And you think to yourself, I could either do nothing, be passive. That's probably the most ethical thing, and just allow the 6 to die. Or I could do an action, but my action will kill 1. What's better? And philosophers have debated this for many, many years. The self-driving car companies are now debating this because imagine a car going down the road and the brakes go out and the car has to decide, do I swerve to the right and hit the pedestrian, or do I smash into the car in front of me? God forbid, but these are decisions that ethical decision making that cars are actually being programmed with today. And interestingly, one of the companies is in Israel, and they're asking rabbis, what do you think? And so one of the great rabbis of the last generation was asked this question. He wrote on it. He was one of the first to really analyze it. And he said, I believe that the Torah approach would be, and that, now when I say the Torah approach, I mean, a lot of rabbis disagree, and there's lots of different approaches. But what he said was fascinating. He said, this one rabbi is called the Chazon Ish. He said, you should divert the arrow. You should turn the train. Why? Because on the one hand, you say, how could you say that? It's killing a person. He said, yeah, but it's saving 5. It's an act of saving, not an act of killing. And sometimes, and this is the really challenging question, sometimes you have to decide, how do we provide the most benefit possible? And the rabbis felt, well, to provide the most benefit, we have to figure out what's the way to help the most people. So I'll give you an example, 2 examples from this pandemic. Earlier in the pandemic, and the truth is, unfortunately, again, today here in Los Angeles, but hopefully not in Arizona, the question was rationing scarce resources, such as ventilators. What do you do if you don't have enough ventilators for the amount of people that are in need of a ventilator? So what the rabbis encouraged, and what was happening, and what was being encouraged was, well, look, if you have a person who will need a ventilator for a couple of days, and there's a high likelihood that they will then be able to be safely weaned off the ventilator, and then that ventilator can be used for another person, such that you have, let's say, 20 people in need, and you can gradually get the ventilators to these people, and it will require less nursing resources and less ICU space. So whereas if you have other people who would likely become ventilator dependent, and they'll likely spend weeks on the ventilator, and it might not even be effective for them. So the ethicists were saying, you know what, you're going to have to triage the ventilator for the person who will likely need it for the shortest amount of time, thereby enabling you to use more ventilators for more people. Whereas, and that sometimes favored younger, healthier people. On the opposite end, when it comes now to the vaccine, when you say, well, let's also ask, and I saw some of these questions related to this in the chat, the vaccine, if we're trying to save the most lives possible, so if people who are older and have comorbidities are more vulnerable to COVID-19, then they should be prioritized for the vaccine, because their life can more likely be saved. If a younger person gets COVID-19, we don't want anyone to get it, but if a younger person gets it, a healthy person, they're more likely to be okay. So we need to triage that vaccine. We only have so much, and we can only give out so much at a time. So we triage the vaccine to the people who are more vulnerable, who are sicker and oftentimes older, opposite of the ventilators. One more value. There's so many, but just one more thought, debate. Because in addition to determining triage by age, we also make one more determination, and this is, there's a lot of factors that we think of. There's societal, concerns, whether it's, trying to help people who are in the most need, such as people who are poor, communities of color that have struggled the most during this pandemic. Maybe there's a societal obligation to help those communities that have been the worst off during the pandemic, that they should get priority when it comes to vaccination. There's many who have suggested that. And how about doctors, healthcare providers, or communal leaders? So I want to share with you in one last text, and then I'll stop there, a fascinating text. And this is a text really ancient. Rabbi Kahn started us with Maimonides, then I brought us back to the Talmud. Now we're going back all the way to 2020. And this is Israeli Knesset, actually, their triage guidelines. And it's just, I'll just read it to you, and then I'll explain why I think it's relevant, and then I'll stop there. So the Israeli government, the Knesset, came up with these protocols this was for ventilator triage, but then is being applied as well to vaccines. So and this was headed by, interestingly, a Rabbi Dr. Avram Steinberg. Interestingly, he headed this Knesset subcommittee. So look at what he wrote here. Number 10, this is part of a longer list. He wrote, triage decisions will only take place on a medical basis, right? Only based on medical criteria. Therefore, the following factors may not be included in triage decisions: religion, race, gender, nationality, country of origin, And indeed, the state of Israel was very proactive in trying to help, Syrian refugees, Palestinians. Everyone needs to be treated equally when it comes to healthcare. Country of origin, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, social status, family status, citizenship, occupation. None of these things may prioritize anyone. Everyone deserves equal access to medication, to vaccines, to ventilators. Number two, years of life, including age considerations. This has been debated in some places, but he says, nope, the chronological age itself is not a legitimate consideration in triaging life-saving treatment, but only as part of a combination of risk factors, as I mentioned before. This is in response to some ethicists who have argued that you should be saving the most life years, so younger people get priority. And many rabbis have felt that that's offensive, to choose to give some priority based on their age because they're younger. Disability. Disability in itself is not a legitimate consideration in triaging life-saving treatment, but only as part of a combination of risk factors. Circumstances that may be considered to be the patient's fault, including negligence, which may have caused COVID-19 infection, right? Someone shows up in the emergency room wearing a t-shirt that says, COVID is a hoax, don't wear a mask. And, they have COVID. Well, the obligation is still to take care of them just as much. It reminds me of a story of a doctor here who was treating a patient and had to tear off his shirt to resuscitate him, and encountered a huge swastika on his chest. And for a moment, she paused and thought, do I really have to save this guy's life? And then she thought, you know what? My commitment to medicine is yes, I do. And she was visiting him the next day as he recovered. She had a very Jewish name. And she didn't say anything though. And he says to her as she's walking out of the room, doctor, I want to say something to you. You probably saw my chest when you were working on me. And she says, yes. And he says, I just want to apologize and let you know that I feel horribly and I'm so ashamed and embarrassed. Anyways, she just told me that story. It was so meaningful, powerful. But anyways, that cannot be part of the decision-making, even if someone was negligent. Merits to the patient from their past actions. Nope. But here's the one exception, and this is fascinating, that the state of Israel gave. Number 11 there. Healthcare professionals, even if infected while treating COVID-19 patients, will not be given priority unless it is necessary to overcome staff shortages, either by facilitating return to work after their recovery or as an incentive to volunteering, right? When we have shortages and someone's risking their life, you need to be able to say to them, if you get sick, we will care for you. When there's medical equality between two patients, healthcare professionals will receive priority. So this document is arguing that everyone has to be treated totally equally, radically equal. But there can be a carve out for medical healthcare professionals. Now, why is that? So on the most basic level, we've spoken before just a minute ago about how people who are at the highest risk deserve the highest priority. So healthcare professional is at highest risk. There's also a societal value of needing healthcare professionals. I asked Dr. Steinberg, the head of this committee, what is that based on? Because we were debating that here at Cedars-Sinai, and we did not come to that conclusion when it came to the ventilators. The vaccine, that was the CDC's determination. It's actually, and it was on the top of the page there, but I just for time's sake, I just want to conclude. But the Talmud, it's actually based on the Talmud. The Talmud actually rules that when it comes to saving life, we treat everyone equally, but there can be a time when the words that the Talmud used there, if you saw on the top of the page, the tzibur tzrichim lo, that someone is needed by the masses, that can give sometimes a priority. And so there could be times when communal need is actually can be a determining factor. And that actually brings me back to where I started in these determinations. The value in Jewish law is what we call hatzalat harabim, saving the community. How do we help the most people? How do we benefit the most people possible? And this is part of our communal obligations, communal responsibility. And this is why we have a responsibility to take the vaccine, in my humble opinion. Obviously, we're not trying to be judgmental or push anything on anybody, but there is this there's this communal expectation. Talk to your own doctors and your rabbis, but there's a communal mindedness of how we determine if we should take it and also how we should distribute it. A lot more to say about. I'm happy to see what comes up in the questions, and really enjoying learning from all of you and from Dr. Sunenshine.
Well, thanks so very much to both of you. I'm gonna, just because we only have about 10, 15 minutes left, just start to fire away some questions. And I wanted to start with actually both of you. Rabbi, why don't we start with you, because it's gonna carry or tag along to your last part of your presentation, especially when you looked at the Israeli guidelines for treatment, and my guess is that's applicable to most types of treatment in Israeli hospitals in general, but specifically for treatment and triage of COVID patients. And you're living in a community now where, allegedly Los Angeles is running out of oxygen tanks, and people don't have enough oxygen tanks to take home, and there aren't enough in the hospitals. At what point do you think the federal, state, and local government is responsible for the health and well-being of individuals vis-a-vis comorbidities such as obesity, comorbidities such as health-related matters that arise out of people's choice, smoking, you can fill in the blanks, use of recreational drugs. In other words, yes, it's great to have this really zealous, equal, level playing field for triage, but do you give the oxygen tank to the person who's the smoker, or do you give the oxygen tank to the person who's the non-smoker? And I ask that question to ask you to be provocative, of course. That's fun, right? But how does our tradition, the wisdom of our tradition, maintain that balance, given that everybody's created in the image of God, everyone is equal, as it says in the guidelines that you read? And then, Dr. Sunenshine, same question goes to you as a communal health guru. How do we make determinations based on vaccination for those who live healthier lives than others? I think it goes to a lot of the questions, what's underlying, I think, a lot of the questions. So Rabbi, let's start with you, and then Rebecca, we'll go to you.
Okay, so Rabbi, kind of as you opened up with, I do believe that an individual has responsibility to care for their health and their well-being and their body. It is an individual responsibility, and that's important. I also believe that the government also has responsibility to provide for the care, for healthcare for its citizens. There's obviously a balance and a partnership, right? We are expected to do our part, and we can also expect the government to provide resources for the health and well-being of its citizenry. I still think, though, that when it comes to making these types of decisions, I don't think it's proper for government to start making decisions about who they will treat based on these types of factors. It's first of all, it's a slippery slope. They start making these values decisions on prioritizing some life over other lives. It's very dangerous, and it can become reckless and inappropriate. And some people might have concerns, it's things out of their control, and it's not fair to not give them the same access just because of certain value judgments that are being made. And like you said, we really strongly believe in the equality of all human beings. We're in the image of God, and as the Talmud says many times, who knows whose blood is redder? So it's not our place to make those determinations.
Right, very good. Thank you so much. I again wanted to be provocative because I think that in the country in general right now, everyone is bound to think everything. And when we start hearing all of the conspiracy theories and theorists and anti-vaxxers, and then we throw in, well, that person is and isn't deserving of treatment, it becomes, really complex. And I know Judaism has something very significant to say, going back to Salam Elohim. Dr. Sunenshine, have you been grappling with these issues at all?
Well, all the time. First of all, I just want to thank you, Rabbi Weiner. I thought that was an amazing talk, and we think a lot about triaging and all those issues. And we help write the guidelines for the county. So it's so interesting to know what Judaism says. I do want to touch on when you talked about a behavior that is a quote choice. I think choice is a little bit of a misnomer in public health. There's something called the social determinants of health. And we think about the family that a person is born into, whether they're born into poverty, whether they're living in an area where there's a lot of smoke around or near a highway. There's lots of things that contribute to your health that seem to be a choice, but are really not a choice. And for that reason, we do not consider things that even seem to be a choice when we are making decisions on who to take care of. We try to take care of the most people the best way possible with the limited resources that we have.
Right. So it goes back to the whole, the people who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones, and this overly judgmental part of our society right now that wants to mandate, not mandate. If they're mandated to do something, they're anti-mandators. If they're not mandated to do it, they want the mandate. And it's just another sort of, everything is bifurcated so deeply right now in the country that we say, politics is entering the conversation. It's not politics per se, it's non-scientific thought is entering the conversation, which must be very, very frustrating for those who believe in science. Rabbi and Rebecca, for both of you, I started by saying Judaism has had like this 2,000-year love affair with medicine, with science. We don't only aspire to become scientists. Every Jewish mother is a physician, as it turns out, is a doctor, a diagnostician especially. Jewish fathers, not so much, although I think I'm pretty good. I just make tea for the kids. Isabel is the only one who now lives at home. So whenever I sense that she's sick, I make tea and it seems to work. She complains whether I make the tea or not. My question to you guys, though, is if you think about this throughout your backgrounds as in chaplaincy and as practitioners, and this came up, what is really the difference between emergency approval and regular approval? And it seems to me that if we were just going to throw as much money at disease control as we did in the last 10 months for COVID, everything would be approved much, much faster. We'd have more medicines that work on the market. And why don't we just start throwing a lot of money into research and development so that we're ahead of the next pandemic? You said you start researching the second the new one starts, and we know there's going to be another pandemic at some point. Chas v'shalom, as we say, God forbid it should be like this. And then for Rabbi Weiner, what preventative stuff, what resources that are new that you have found useful do you think we need to further develop post-COVID? So Rebecca, let's start with you about, should we just throw money and get all this settled now before the next one starts?
If we had unlimited resources, that would be fantastic. But I think the reality is that we have limited resources. What is the difference between an emergency use authorization and when something is, quote, FDA approved? Emergency use authorization takes into account the fact that we are in a pandemic or a very large epidemic, and that there's an urgency to get something, and we might not require for instance, the number of people in a clinical trial, 20 to 30,000 is what was in it. Maybe normally we would make wait 3 to 6 months after people got vaccinated to wait, but because of the conditions and the pandemic, the FDA accepts less time of follow-up before they look at approving a drug, because it can save so many lives to make the process go faster, which I think aligns very nicely. It's looking at the greater good, so they allow this emergency authorization.
But is it true or false that if we started to turn more research and development for vaccines for other diseases into emergence, and throwing more money into the pot to research and development, that what we learned, maybe, tell me if we're right or wrong, I remember reading that when they discovered the vaccine for mumps, it was a 4-year turnaround, and that was like it was in the 60s, right? So that was miraculous. 4 years, we found a cure for the mumps, a vaccine for the mumps. But why does it take so long? Didn't we learn in the last 10 months that it doesn't need to take as long as it takes for some of these vaccinations and medications? Like, we have the ability, right? Like the $6 million, we have the technology.
It's limited resources. The amount of money and the amount of people and the amount of research, there's only so many people that can work on research and development. And if everybody is working on the same thing and putting all the resources into it, we're not going to be looking at HIV vaccines. We're not going to be looking at all these other diseases. So there's so many different problems. We can't pour all of our resources into any one. And that's why I think having this steady approval process and the way we award funding makes a lot of sense for things that are not an absolute emergency. That's my thought.
I don't know. I guess I think that if we can run professional sports, we can probably at some point prioritize. That was a little editorialization I had to throw in there again to be provocative. Rabbi, sorry, Rabbi Weiner, what things have you discovered? What things do we need to, as clergy, as pastoral care, in partnership with doctors like Dr. Sunenshine? What did we learn? What can we do differently? What should we utilize more post-COVID?
I guess some things that we've learned is, it's been a tremendous time of creativity, especially for clergy. We've had to come up with new ways of doing things. So I'll just give you a couple very quick examples. We, oftentimes when I'm seeing patients, I know that music is very healing for people. So if we want to be healing though, I know patients always love, for example, Debbie Friedman's Misha Beirach. Although if I would sing it to them, they'll get much sicker, right? So oftentimes I pull out my phone, I'll pull it up on, YouTube and play it for them. And that's very beautiful. They love it, hearing it. We came up with a program now, just an example of one thing we learned is that we had concert musicians who have been out of work for a year who volunteered to do brief free concerts for patients upon request. And so patients will request songs that they love. The musician will come online, talk to them, play the music, and they get this concert. And we have found that how inspiring it has been for individual contact, meaning not just watching a YouTube video, but how profound it can be to connect with someone live, even if they're not in the room. And I think we're going to keep that. We have these musicians from New York or wherever coming live to the room. And even in person, what we found is that one thing we never did was, our hospital has places where you have to come in through the entrance. Now they become screening sites. We have to be screened every day. But we realized, people, especially staff, are burnt out or overwhelmed. We can use these screening sites as places where we can have gifts and goodies and blessing of the hands for the staff and kind of a quick motivational moment as they come in or leave work for the day. And like we never would have thought in the past of the entrance of a hospital of being a holy spot. But now we've kind of turned it into one. And these are ways that we've had to be creative, and I hope we continue them even when this pandemic is over very quickly, I hope.
I have one more quick question, and then I'm going to let Rabbi Mason Barkin, of course, ask the last question and ask her wrap-up question. First of all, I want to just say to Dr. Sunenshine, yes, both, and this was just coincidental. Both Rabbi Mason Barkin and I received our first Pfizer vaccine today, and I want to just give my compliments to you and the county. It was an incredibly smooth, easy, well thought out, well planned, beautifully staffed. I'm a little bit worried that I'm not hurting enough right now. You made me a little bit worried that I'm not getting the full effect of the shot, but that probably means tomorrow morning I'll wake up with a fever and headache. But I just want to give my compliments, and I thanked everybody I could. I probably would have gotten out and shook hands with more people and given them hugs to thank the firefighters and the military and everyone who was out there. So thank you for an incredibly well orchestrated, beautifully done first shot experience. My question is, what have you learned in the last 10 months? And I want to put a caveat on that by saying to both you and Rabbi Weiner, what you guys have done in the last 10 months has absolutely blown me away. I go to hospitals, Rabbi Mason Barkin goes to hospitals, and we hold the phones up and we let families talk because we're clergy, get in, and we've been on COVID wards, and probably a half dozen times have visited people. I don't know how you're doing what you're doing. I'm ready to sleep for 3 days after each experience that I have. And I don't think anyone can thank you enough for what you have meant to our communities and this country. And what have you learned? Again, if I hit by the way, the Powerball is 500 million tonight, and I bought a ticket. If I win, I am sending you and your families to Hawaii for a year. I don't know how you've done it, but what have you learned, and how have you gotten through this? And then I'll let Rabbi Mason Barkin wrap it up.
I think I've learned, part of what I think everyone learns with age, but I learned it in a hurry. don't just assume that you know where someone else is coming from, whether they agree with you or not. Seek to understand. And that's the best way, I think, for me to understand why people are feeling afraid of the vaccine or afraid of the disease or however they're feeling. Seeking to understand helps me make some sense, even though there's very little sense to make. And I think I have to give credit to my team. I have an amazing team. I'm a little sleep deprived. The people in public health are incredible, and they work so hard. So they're very motivating, and I'm very lucky to work with them.
Well, please let them know that your rabbi lost it a little bit too tonight, and thanking them. And I cannot thank them enough. And maybe if I hit the full Powerball, they can all come to Hawaii too.
Thank you.
You're welcome, because they deserve it. Rabbi?
Yeah, I mean, as much as, we sometimes lose faith in humanity when we watch the news and what's things happening, you walk into hospitals and you see the dedication, people risking their lives and working so hard and tirelessly on behalf of our society. It's just so impressive what people are doing on behalf of others. For me, I've been reminded this year, especially of the importance of, caring for oneself and taking, making sure to do things that nourish you and sustain you and keep you going. So for me, it's been, exercise and music, making sure that I don't stop doing those things and that I encourage others as well, because we really need to take care of ourselves if we're going to survive this, physically and emotionally.
Thank you both so much for your honesty and your thoughtful responses to all of these questions. That would have been a really good one to end on, but Rabbi Khan said I could ask one more. So I'll ask just another, just at the end of the day, what's the one sentence takeaway that you want us to leave this space with? What's the one thing that you want us to know?
I'm hoping that the rabbi will go first.
Well, I think, we've been through a tough time as a society, and I think we need healing. And I think my takeaway is that, we can help each other to heal. We can care for each other. We can look at the role models that we have in public health and in medicine and scientists and in people like your rabbis who have been role models in being vaccinated and in bringing up these important conversations as they have, and to recognize that it's in our hands to bring healing to the world. And so the vaccine is in some ways, it's a physical, it's a shot, it's kind of medicine, but it's symbolic of the healing that we can bring in a much broader way, a social, emotional, spiritual type of healing that we all need to bring about together.
Thank you so much.
I would say that it's really all about community. I think with public health, with Judaism, I think this pandemic was a really good reminder of how important our family and our loved ones and our friends and our community is. And they inspire us to keep going, particularly when we are working really hard and sleep deprived. And it's worth it to try and understand and help one another to keep our community intact. And to keep moving forward, no matter how hard it gets, that we are better working toward a common cause.
Thank you. I just want to do a shameless plug. First of all, thank you. I'm going to actually, Sarah, you'll do the final thank yous. The shameless plug is that our next, not conversation, but our next Lunch and Learn next Tuesday will be a special, this is just a commercial, a special presentation, a pre-inauguration presentation of our second conversation with Rabbi Khan. I will be joined by my good friend and my classmate and colleague of almost many years, Rabbi Aaron Bisno, who is the senior rabbi of Rodef Shalom Congregation in Pittsburgh. We are going to talk about conspiracy theories, but most specifically, we're going to talk about 2+ years later, his experience living and working as a senior rabbi of a major Reform congregation half a mile away from Tree of Life Synagogue. And we're going to walk through what happened on that Shabbat morning a little over 2 years ago and talk about the tragedy and talk about how he, as a host congregation of Tree of Life, from the Shabbat right after that Shabbat, talking about survival, helped to the survivors survive. And in a time when QAnon and conspiracy theorists continue to cause grave danger and harm to the Jewish people and the Jewish community, I think Rabbi Business is going to have some wonderful and powerful and somewhat scary thoughts for us, having experienced the Pittsburgh tragedy 2 years ago. So that'll be this coming Tuesday for Lunch and Learn at noon, and the information and marketing piece on that will come out tomorrow. Thank you again, Rabbi. Pleased to, and thank you guys very much.
Thank you. And just another, Rabbi Khan did it, so I will too. Just another quick plug, really shameless. As we were hearing all of your questions come in, another esteemed expert and epidemiologist who is on with us tonight, Susie Sachs, has really generously offered to answer some of these technical questions that came up in the chat tomorrow during Coffee Talk. So tomorrow at 3 o'clock on Zoom, we can continue the conversation offline, but still online. So thank you to Susie for offering to share some of your expertise as well. And really from the bottom of my heart, I want to thank Dr. Sunenshine and Rabbi Weiner for being here tonight. We know that there is so many other things on your to-do list right now, and sleep being one of them. So I hope you take some comfort and are able to get some rest in knowing that you now have an army of people who have heard your wisdom and are going to carry it forward and share what we've learned from you. So thank you for bringing us your knowledge. Thank you for your generous spirits and thoughtful answers to all of our questions. And it really has just been a pleasure to learn from you tonight. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. I hope we'll see you at 3 tomorrow, or at noon on Tuesday, or tomorrow night for Shabbat. No, not tomorrow, Friday night. Shabbat Shalom early, and we'll see you soon. Thank you so much.